You know, I'm asked all the time to give talks, and I've given around the country, and I think almost every state of the union, maybe except with Alaska. And Alaska, if you want to have me come, I'd love to come. But the point is, I'm asked because there's virtually no one else talking about the war that we are in right now. Most of America thinks we're at peacetime. It's not the case. We're fighting a war, and we're fighting a two-front war. We're fighting against all enemies, foreign and domestic. How did we get here? Well, it's really about money and power. This is a long-term struggle. This is about the collective versus the individual. And if you trace it back, you can go all the way back to the early days of the United States in the Washington cabinet, where you had people like Thomas Jefferson who wanted to have a smaller government, and you had Alexander Hamilton who wanted to have a larger government. And yet it's on steroids. We're seeing a real battle between individual liberty and a demand for the collective, where everybody has to follow the same rule, the same idea. It's not just taking place in America, it's taking place all around the world. But it's taking place in America. It's impacting your life. We're talking about Wall Street, we're talking about globalism, we're talking about a lot of different forces coming arrayed to try and get you to conform. Now, it's an age-old battle. We have two categories of enemies that I mentioned. We have the foreign enemy, which would be China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, the jihadis. But we also have domestic enemies. We call them the red-green axis, where the domestic Marxists and the domestic Islamists are working together. We have progressive leftists. We have crony capitalists. We have the woke corporations, special interest groups. It's top-down, but it's also bottom-up. And it's an attempt to control your life. The challenge is, because it has multiple fronts on the war and it's reached both corporate America and Wall Street, that it's impacting just about everything you do. They're trying to control your spending, for example, and your investments. We talk about all the time the ESG movement with Larry Fink and BlackRock, where they're wanting to demand that what you invest in conforms to what's important to them. Environmental, social justice, governance, and they're doing it through proxy ballot measures. In other words, if you own shares of a company, you get to vote for the things that the company is doing. Those are called proxies. But they're doing it without your knowledge, really slipping it in to where the corporations all of a sudden are telling you to be less white, like Coca-Cola did, or Disney. Inside Disney, they're telling people to give up their white privilege, and they're attacking them. It really is wokeness gone wild. And they're getting permission from shareholders to do it. They're seeking board control. They're putting their candidates in charge of these American companies. You wonder, why would Coke throw away 74 million customers? They do it because the board is willing to go along with it. They've taken control of the boards of corporations. And they're forcing investment into China and Chinese IPOs. You know, we put a stop to that under the Trump administration. We eliminated a lot of these bad, nefarious Chinese companies coming to the American market. Guess what? Under Biden, that is ramped right back up. Did you know that? Did you know that you're funding the Chinese Communist Party and part of the Chinese military? Well, if you have a pension plan and other people are investing for you, that's quite likely true. This is a part of Chinese unrestricted warfare. Their strategy is unconventional warfare without limits. That's the term, unrestricted. There's no restrictions. Anything can be a matter of warfare. It's a 1999 book written by two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army, and both of them have been promoted. One of them is the major general in charge of their National Defense University now. Their goal is to establish Chinese dominance on the planet. That is the China dream that President Xi Jinping believes in and dreams about. They believe that they're the middle kingdom between heaven and earth. What comes in between is China. That means everybody else is beneath and underneath Chinese control. And they've been very successful infiltrating Western powers. They've infiltrated our education system at the college and at the high school level. They've infiltrated entertainment. You can't make a movie in Hollywood without the approval of the Chinese masters. They've infiltrated the boardrooms of American companies, the political system, and the financial system. They've had unbelievable success over the past 2 decades. In fact, in 1999, when the book Unrestricted Warfare was first written, the Chinese economy was 1/10 the size of what it is today. Basically, it's on par with the United States economy. 1/10. That means in 1999, China's economy was about the same size as Italy in the world. Think about that. How much they've just expanded in 2 decades' time. They've gotten control of major global organizations. They're the power player at the United Nations, at the World Health Organization, and they're poised for dominance. Their intention is by 2025 to take dominance, and by 2035, extraordinary dominance. And what they've built their strategy on? 45 communist goals. And when I say 45 communist goals, you stop and say, wait a minute, is Chinese communist? Yes, it's a communist nation. Absolutely, and they never gave that up. But I want to take you a little bit back in history. On January 10th, 1963, Congressman Albert Herlong from Florida read a list of 45 communist goals into the congressional record. Now, I took this from a book that was written in the 1950s by someone I knew, W. Cleon Skousen, who was a former FBI agent. The title of the book was The Naked Communist. And he lists the principles, and these principles are worth revisiting today because it'll give us insight into the thinking and the strategies of these liberal elite in our nation that seem to be adopting communism. Here's some of the examples of the communist goals. Promote free trade at all costs. Sound familiar? All those free traders, no matter what, no matter who's doing the trade, it's got to be free trade at all costs. Recognize Red China as true China. Go out and say that Taiwan is the real China, they're going to get mad at you. Then they said, promote UN as the only hope for mankind, the United Nations. Capture one or both political parties. Get control of the schools. Use student riots to help effect change. Infiltrate the press. Gain control of key media figures. Discredit American history and culture. Degrade art so that you don't see beauty in art, you see obscure things and ugliness. Eliminate obscenity laws. Promote pornography and homosexuality. Infiltrate the churches. Eliminate prayer from schools. Discredit the family. Internationalize the Panama Canal. You see a familiar pattern here? That's exactly what America has done ever since this was published in the congressional record. For the most of my lifetime, we have seen this plan adopted. That was a communist plan and one that's continued to be carried out through unrestricted warfare by China. Now, China leads the axis of evil. Now, I want to stop here. I have no problem with the Chinese people. They are phenomenal, intelligent, powerful, wonderful people, freedom-loving. Just look at what Hong Kong was until Communist China put their hand down and said stop, and they stopped all the freedom and the liberty. I visited Hong Kong when this book, Unrestricted Warfare, was written. That's when I was last in Hong Kong. I tell you, they're dynamic, vital people. Go to Taiwan, brilliant people. So this Asian hate thing, don't do that. That's bad. Don't do it. But the Chinese Communist Party, that's bad news. And they're an international criminal cartel masquerading as a government, oppressing their own people and trying to form that oppression to take it around the world. It's not just China. There are elements in Russia, North Korea, Iran, and even jihadis that are really, really dangerous and a part of this axis of evil. We've got problems in the world and foreign enemies. This is unrestricted warfare. Now I'm going to read to you, this is an article that came out in Epoch Times, and it's a professor that's writing, a leading Chinese professor. And here's a quote from the article. It says, the professor's multi-pronged strategy involves a range of malign actors to subvert the United States while strengthening the Chinese regime. They include interfering in U.S. elections, controlling the American market, cultivating global enemies to challenge the United States, stealing U.S. technology, expanding Chinese territory, and influencing international organizations. The strategy is to topple the United States with two broad components, weakening America through both internal and foreign sources and strengthening the Chinese regime's economic, military, and diplomatic power. This is something that they found that was written several years ago that describes how they intend to take America down. And they've been doing it. So, Chinese unrestricted warfare, they talk about infiltrating education, taking over media and entertainment, political control, financial control, and global institutions. We're watching all of that happen. We've talked with Kevin Sorbo, for example, about what's happened in Hollywood. You know, you cannot make a movie in Hollywood without Chinese permission because the Chinese box office is bigger and more important. Plus, they've bought influence areas, whether it's in the theaters or whether it's in the studios or just in the media outlets. The same thing is true in the educational institutions, where we've seen the Confucius Institutes established, where you can't say anything bad about Communist China at any university that has a Confucius Institute. They give a lot of money. They also send a lot of full-paying Chinese students into American universities. I'll tell you, they want that because you don't have to give scholarships, you can accept the Chinese students, and then when they come from China to the United States, they tell them, hey, remember whose country you're loyal to. So they've taken over in political arenas. You can't say bad things about China in certain political locations of the country, in the Congress and so forth. They've taken financial control. Look at what happened with Hunter Biden and his laptop. It exposes the fact that the guy was asking for millions of dollars from Chinese companies. One email I saw, they wanted $10 million. Hunter wanted $10 million just for an introduction. This is part of the Chinese strategy. It's also a part of the long march through the institutions. I mentioned we have both foreign enemies and domestic enemies. On the domestic playbook side, they're following the long march through the institutions, which is a phrase coined by Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, who lived 1891 to 1937. And he described how a society could be subverted without recourse to arms by co-opting society's chief institutions, schools, universities, courts, corporations, media, and political parties. Dedicated leftists could effect revolutionary change. And I got that from the Catholic World Report that was published in June of 2020, The Long March Through the American Institutions. That's exactly what they've done. Have you noticed how the schools, the universities, the courts, the corporations, the media, all of that, just as they said, have adopted far left policies? Things that you don't even agree with, but you're afraid to speak up against? You're probably not afraid. You're a follower of the economic war room, but people are afraid to even mention these things. That's scary in itself. Their goal is to exploit intersectionality, to dismantle cultural hegemony, to subvert the ideological opposition, to challenge the family, religion, and the political order. Guess what all that means? Basically, to break down American society. To tell it, hey, look, what you thought was American, that's not American anymore. Don't you stand up for the flag and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Instead, take a knee. And don't be proud of who you are. And don't be proud of America. That's all a part of this long march through the institutions. They've been told to challenge the family, religion, and political order. And it's based on things like Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, and even before that, Machiavelli wrote The Prince. At the core of all of this is economic warfare. It's not by accident. You know, the church is turning woke. It's turning away from a biblical worldview. And I don't mean the true church. The true church will not fail. Jesus promised us that. But there are a lot of places that call themselves church, and they're more woke than they are Bible-believing. In fact, they've thrown out the Bible. The Bible is considered hate speech in some of these churches. We've seen the military also embrace social change over readiness. I was talking with Dr. Everett Piper, who wrote the book Grow Up. While China is developing super soldiers through genetic modification, we're telling our soldiers to decide which gender they are, and we'll support them in whatever they want to be, and self-actualization and all of this in terms of that. They're building super soldiers. Put us in a war, who do you think's going to win? And we see Wall Street, which is so sad to me because I've been a part of the American financial institutions for my entire career, dating back to the 1980s. But Wall Street's embracing stakeholder capitalism and ESG over profits and shareholders. Those are just code words for socialism. And Wall Street's pushing it. Why? They've got their money. They sit in their privileged positions. They want your money to fund their socialist agenda. Not give you the best return you can get for your money, not take care of the shareholders, not get maximum profits. They want the corporations designed to take us into a socialist new world order. Now, we know the strategy. Let's look at the tactics. How are they doing this? Partly through education. They've taken control of the ivory tower. So these great institutions, many of which were like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, designed to teach about God and about freedom, have become so woke that they're giving tenure and control to those with gender studies and all sorts of really anti-American views, to where, you know, the American family, no, that's wrong, that's bad. And if you're white, you're wrong. Doesn't matter anything else. If you're white, you're automatically wrong, unless you totally agree with the leftist agenda. They've been abandoning objective truth. So 2 plus 2 equals what? Of course it equals 4. We all know that. But did you know that's racist? Yeah, literally. They've said 2 plus 2 equals 4 is racist. They've eliminated the ACT and the SAT because they have racial bias. And you know, there's some validity to some of that. But eliminating them? What's the standard? You can't do standardized testing. They've allowed legalized discrimination by race. Let me say that again. They've allowed legalized discrimination by race. In other words, it doesn't matter white, if you're Asian, we have too many Asians, therefore we have to keep some out. So there may be some Asians with higher scores than white or black or any other background that are not allowed entry into a college so that they can bring more equity. The goal is no longer equality of opportunity, it's equity, so the outcomes are the same. That doesn't allow for the best and the brightest to rise to the top. It doesn't allow for excellence. It allows for mediocrity. Equity is a formula for going backwards, not forwards. And of course, I mentioned the Confucius Institutes earlier. The Chinese have infiltrated just the same way that the Nazis did in the 1930s. I mean, you may not know this, because if you haven't studied history, you think, well, Hitler's bad. We all knew Hitler was bad. Everybody thought Hitler was bad. That's not true. In the 1930s, he was highly admired. He was on the cover of Time magazine as a Man of the Year. And in American universities that were so woke at that time and so progressive, well, guess what? They believed in eugenics, and they believed that some races were better than others at that time, and they wanted to eliminate those. This is part of where Planned Parenthood came through, Margaret Sanger, and all of that idea that came from the universities of the 1930s, in part funded by Nazi Germany. And they had adherents here, Charles Lindbergh, Henry Ford, and others. They're, we think as great men, and they were in so many ways, but they admired Hitler. And the net result of it was there was a pro-Nazi teaching on American college campuses. Can you believe that? Now you say Adolf Hitler on a college campus, and they automatically think, well, they think Donald Trump. But what they really in the 1930s, they thought he was an admired man who was cleansing the world. Now I got to warn you, that is beginning to come back. This time they're not going to cleanse the world of Jews, which was the Hitler view. They're talking about cleansing the world from white people. I'm not kidding. That's being spoken of in college, on some college campuses and in journals, and a lot of people are talking about things like that. So that's one of the strategies, education, and we've got to be aware of that. Another strategy or another tactic is finance. And we talk about the $40 trillion ESG movement. $40 trillion of your money and money of people around the world collected by Wall Street and the woke institutions, and said, we're no longer going to invest to get maximum profits. Our goal now is to socially re-engineer the world. And so they give ESG scores to companies. That's why Koch said, we oppose the Georgia election reform. We oppose it because it asks for a voter ID, and that's not very woke because, it's racist and all these. Where are they getting that? They're trying to say, look how woke we are, so they get a good ESG score, because there are groups like BlackRock and Merrill Lynch and others that are rating companies on their ESG score. That's right. It is weaponizing your money. The SEC and the Labor Department, they actually sided with us during the Trump administration. They're about to flip back. They're about to be pro-ESG. and that's a little scary. We've introduced on the Economic War Room Stephen Sukup, who wrote the book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. You got to go back and watch that episode. It's phenomenal. Or when we've had Justin Danoff talking about this. This is a dangerous tactic being used, the weaponization of your money. And the Chinese used it. Remember the thrift savings plan? Hopefully we drove a stake into the heart of that will not come back, rise from the dead like Dracula. Hopefully not. Because we had at one time been allowing our servicemen and women to invest in the thrift savings plan, trusting the managers and who were taking a big piece of that money and sending it to Communist China, building weapons aimed against the United States. How insane is that? That's a part of the finance tactic that's being used against us. And corporate America. Corporate America is running PR now to try and make you feel guilty about believing in America. In fact, there's a group called Mill Road Capital, and they've launched a progressive governance fund to improve governance and diversity in small public companies. Really what they're saying here is we're going to dangle money in front of you, and if you small company will come along to the leftist woke agenda, then we'll fund you. That is frightening. So talking about other taxes, corporate America, did you know that Chevron Corporation, the great oil company, voted in a resolution that they would adopt the Paris Climate Accords, which essentially call for the banning and elimination of fossil fuels? That is a suicide pact by Chevron shareholders. They voted in proxies to adopt the Paris Climate Accords, which will put them out of business. That is insane. And yet that's what they've done. Why? Because most of us don't know how to vote proxies. You need to learn. Or better yet, you need an advisor who can help you do it. That's why we do advisor training at Liberty University. You need your advisor to say, hey, look, I don't want my proxy voting to make my money worth less. I want my proxy vote to help the company get better so I make more profits and I get good dividends and good returns on my investments. Facebook is banned in China, but in America they promote Chinese interests. Why is that? That's a part of their takeover of corporate America. Now, another tactic, media and social media. I mentioned Facebook. Well, the cancel culture is if you say anything contrary to the official narrative, we'll just cancel you. We'll demonetize you, and we've been demonetized from YouTube. We said things that the YouTube masters didn't like, and so they said, hey, you're no longer allowed to monetize your channel. They've also dehumanized people. When you eliminate someone from social media, it's almost like erasing them from society in some ways. And these fact checkers, they're not actually checking facts. Who checks the fact checkers? I remember a fact checker checked one of our websites and claimed that we were loaded with malware and said that McAfee had told them that. We got McAfee certified on that site, and it was on the site. They're lying. Fact checkers, crazy. And this idea that they can permanently ban a former president of the United States who has had 74 million votes, that's insane, but that's what they're doing. In other words, we're going to silence any speech. I want to ask you, if speech is given that's false, do you cut it off and silence it, or you just discredit it? They are silencing us. That tells me that they believe that we are onto something. It's not false, it's true. That's the scary thing. This is something, by the way, we've heard that Secretary Clinton was at a meeting with Islamic leaders, and they said, Secretary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, you've got to stop this blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad. You can't do that. You can't let people say anything negative. And that's the blasphemy laws. And from what I was told, Secretary Clinton's response was this. She said, well, we have this pesky thing in the United States called free speech and a First Amendment. We can't really just silence them by government mandate. But what we can do is we can shame anyone who believes or says those things. And we'll just shame them into silence. Guess what? What she said is what's happening right now. Now, another tactic that they use is government and bureaucracy. We know that the deep state has weaponized intelligence. I dealt with this when I was working with the Pentagon, and I was trying to tell them, look, There is an attempt to influence our elections using the economy in 2008. And I was bold about saying that, and they tried to shut me up at the bureaucratic level. We also know that this is the same bureaucracy that has mask mandates, lockdowns, gun control, vaccine passports, and all of those things that they're promoting as safety measures. Don't worry, you give up a little bit of liberty, but it's for your safety. Don't worry, just a little bit of liberty, give it over here. It's for your safety, it's for your good. Guess what? Whenever they do that, if a person willing to sacrifice their liberty for safety doesn't deserve either one. And guess what? The government's also doing outright espionage. And if they don't use the NSA to track you and monitor you, the Biden administration floated a proposal that they'll hire private contractors to do what the government is not allowed to do and then report back to them. Sound creepy? It is. And manipulate elections? I'm not going to claim that. That's what YouTube says. You say the election was manipulated, you're off YouTube. No, I won't claim that. I will just refer you back to that Chinese quote that I had, that was a goal of unrestricted warfare, to manipulate elections. How could they do it? Oh, I can't say they would hack elections. No, you're not allowed to say that. But the Chinese have essentially said that. Manipulate elections by voter rolls and by influence operations and so forth. And then the corporate threats, we see a Major League Baseball pulling out of Georgia. That's their threat. We will punish you, Georgia, if you don't do what we say. And Georgia passed the election integrity law, so we're moving to Denver. Yeah. This is corporations trying to tell we the people how to live, how to act, how to be. Our duly elected representatives are passing laws that are, by the way, in Georgia, less stringent than New Jersey. And yet Major League Baseball is trying to punish them to send a message. You're under our control. And it's not just the government, it's corporations too. Now, another tactic is the economy. There is a coming wealth transfer effort. You'll hear about wealth taxes, something Elizabeth Warren's talked quite a bit about, the Biden administration's talking about, and just general taxation. The proposals being floated right now have in some states 55% of income taxed away in capital gains. Are you kidding me? We're moving back to the structure that almost destroyed the United States in the 1970s, the structure that almost destroyed England in the 1980s? Are you kidding me? Yeah, that's what they're going back to. And they say, oh, if you make $400,000 or less, you won't pay any taxes. Yeah, Biden said that. It was a slip-up. I get that. He said you won't pay any taxes. What he meant to say is you won't pay any more in taxes. I don't believe that either, and neither should you. They're planning to raise taxes wherever they can get them. $28 trillion in debt, and he's got $6 trillion of additional spending to come. Are you kidding me? They're going to be raising taxes. When you get free college, you think it's free? Kids, you think you're going to go to college for free? You'll be paying it the rest of your life in taxes. Let's talk about regulation. They want to put a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Okay, I get it. It might work in New York. Do you think that's going to work in small town America? Go to one of these small towns in Oklahoma. Pryor, Oklahoma has a Dairy Queen there. Do you think they'll be able to pay $15 an hour to whoever works there? No, they'll just close their doors. You know what's happened? Because of all of the extension of unemployment benefits through COVID, we shut everything down. But don't worry, government's going to send you money. People don't want to go back to work. And that's why we have unemployment issues. That's why we have people. The unemployment problem is not that people don't want to hire, it's people don't want to work. Think about this. Under communism, under socialism, that's the big problem. If everybody gets an equal outcome, who wants to work? So in the communist Constitution, the USSR Constitution, they actually put a phrase in that they stole from the Bible. If any man shall not work, neither shall he eat. Why? Because that's a serious problem of communism. If you're not working, you're not eating. The Bible spoke it as a truth. The Communist Party picked it up and says, we have to enforce this. But just because you're working doesn't mean you're working hard. Are you working hard or hardly working? That's the joke, right? Guess what? Under a communist rule, you're hardly working. You want to do the least. And that's where America is being shoved right now. That's why people are running back to jobs. And then we make it $15 an hour and the employer can't afford to employ them, so you got to get more government benefits. your wards of the state. They're crushing small business and entrepreneurs right now. And they control the supply chains, whether it's China or big tech, and they've been stealing intellectual property. And they've been bribing, China has been bribing through the Belt and Road, let us take over your port. We'll come in and fund it, and if you can't pay the bill on it, we'll operate it for you, and then we'll just take it over. This is all a part of this ongoing war with enemies foreign and domestic. Another tactic they have is called social unrest. Yeah, the Communist Party said promote racial divisions. We can go to Manning Johnson where they talked about this. This happened decades ago, that the communists realized that in America, there was upward mobility, and so class warfare wasn't going to happen because the poor guy believed he could get a job, work his way up, and eventually own the company. And that's the part of the American dream. We're the only nation that has this. China has created the Chinese dream, which is to take over the world, but the American dream is about the individual. I can get a job, I can work hard, I can get a house, I can get married, we can have kids, I can send my kids to college, I can get 2 cars. This was the American dream. So they realized, the Marxists early in this country realized they're not going to be able to create this class warfare struggle. So what are they going to do instead? How about racial? Let's push on that hot button. Let's go back to the Civil War fought over that. And their goal is street riots and a political crisis. I'm not making this up. You can look in this book, Unrestricted Warfare, and they talk about the end game is street riots and a political crisis. And when I brought that up in the Pentagon in 2008, 2009, they said, no, America is far too stable to have that. Guess what? They were wrong. The Chinese were right. The communists were right. And we're watching it happen on our streets today. Now, if necessary, they're prepared to use electromagnetic pulse and hacking and destroy our basic infrastructure. If you don't believe that, there's a Russian criminal group that I believe hacked into the Continental Pipeline and is causing gas prices to spike around the country and gas shortages. Why? It creates social unrest. Have you seen food prices lately? When food prices go up, guess what? Social unrest. This is a tried and true formula. It's how you destroy a nation. The communists knew it. The Chinese knew it in the unrestricted warfare. And we've also seen examples of Chinese funding of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, we've documented. They've had Marxist founders. The founders who proclaimed Marxist, who compared their writings to those of Chairman Mao. So that is one of their weapons of warfare, create social unrest. Now, Manning Johnson, he wrote the book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. And I'm telling you, you should look that up. Look up Manning Johnson. We'll put a bonus feature of a link to it of a clip in our battle plan where you can see Manning Johnson talking about this when he was a communist. Then he realized that they were dividing America on racial grounds solely for the purpose of ushering in communism. And he realized, I got to get out of this. This is not good for America. So great respect for Manning Johnson and the work that he wrote decades ago. In fact, that I just showed you, this is Manning Johnson clip that we'll put in our show. Now, we know their strategy. We know the tactics. We've talked about a bunch of them. One of the biggest tactics they have is investments. They want to limit your choice. They don't want you to have investors' needs, wants, and desires expressed. They want you to invest in something that's going to further their agenda. They want to control your retirement plan. Why? Well, because they need the money. We have $28 trillion of debt, and there's $6 trillion Biden's proposed on top of that. Plus, every year we're adding a couple of $1 trillion of debt at the after COVID pandemic pace. So the bottom line is we're going to be at $40 trillion before we can blink. You know, it was just a few months ago when I said we'll be at $30 trillion before we can blink. And guess what? We're there. I mean, that's when we were in the middle of COVID, and I was telling you that this is what's happening. We got to reopen our economy now, and I showed you the studies and all of that. I said we'll be at $30 trillion. Well, we're right now. and it won't be long before we hit $40 trillion. So they want to control the retirement plans to force you to invest in government bonds. That's what failing economies do. That's what they did in Venezuela and Argentina and Zimbabwe and Weimar Germany, because they got to come up with some way to get the money. At some point, people are going to say, this is a bad investment. I don't want to invest in U.S. Treasury bonds anymore. They're working on that now. And they're going to give special treatment for Chinese companies. Mark my words. That's coming in the Biden administration. Now, Larry Fink, we've talked about, he's weaponized BlackRock, $7.4 trillion. He said publicly returns are not our only priority. He's used his influence to bully companies to adopt this progressive agenda. He's used the proxy votes to force a progressive agenda. He said climate change is the #1 priority. Guess what? It's not even number 7 for investors. You look down the list of what's important to investors, off the chart, family. What's important to investors? Family. I want to take care of my family. And the second, my country. You have to then go to human rights, social justice, environment, sustainable corporate policies, climate solutions, religion, diversity, corporate governance, arts and culture. They're way down the list. What's important to you? We believe 3 things: liberty, security, and values. Liberty, personal liberty, economic liberty. We want people to be able to start businesses and grow, and you should be able to invest where you want to invest. Security, you ought to be able to carry personal protection devices. The Second Amendment promises that, but we also ought to have national security. We shouldn't let foreign enemies run rampant in our economy or in our nation. And values, the things you grew up with, Judeo-Christian, Western civilization values. To me, it's the values of the Bible. We believe that's what most people want from their investments. Now, we know their strategy. Look at the tactics, what they're claiming in the name of liberty. This is from a Bible quote. It says, professing to be wise, they became fools. So when you hear up is down and right is wrong, realize that is a part of their tactics, just to confuse, just to create this cognitive dissonance. Oh, we tell you, don't wear masks, don't waste masks. Oh, it doesn't do any good for COVID. And then, a few weeks later, they say, no, you must wear a mask. It's absolutely imperative. Then they tell you, you got to get your COVID vaccine, because when you do, then you'll be able to have all these freedoms, because trust the science, this is working, it's going to work. And then you get your COVID vaccine and they say, oh, well, when you're outside in a very small group of completely vaccinated individuals as early as July 4th, and the president said that, you might be able to have not a long visit, but maybe a short little visit standing around the barbecue and maybe cook a hamburger and share it with someone else outside. This is what they're giving up. They're asking you to give up your liberties. Guess what? This is the kind of condition that was in place prior to the French Revolution, where the people were rejecting God because you had the excesses of crony capitalism, and you had literally the people revolting, and they revolted not just against the king, but also against God. And so they tried to create and institute things like 10-day weeks. I'm not kidding. They said a week's not 7 days, it's 10 days. Didn't work out very well for them, because a week is 7 days. But they also had extreme bloodshed. That's where the guillotines came out, and people literally lost their heads. And people that were a part of the revolution at the beginning became the enemy in the middle, and they lost their heads at the end too. This is very selective. They turned on everybody. It was a horrible, horrible moment in the human experience. And we romanticize it a little bit, because the United States of America, we had our liberty about the same time. But the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution is the French Revolution was a collectivist revolution. And if you disagreed, off with your head. The American Revolution was about personal, individual liberty. We believed in the power of the individual. Guess which has endured? Guess which can endure? One of them is righteous and good and right, built on biblical truth, and the other is spawned from hell, this collectivist idea. Somehow, though, we want to deny human nature and objective truth. You know, those people who say, hey, we're the party of science, we believe in science. Look at chromosome science. Look at that. Is that not science? X and Y. I mean, I'm just telling you, 2 + 2 = 4. These are facts. Now, how do we fight back? Number one, we are still the majority and we still have the money, at least at this moment. Your money doesn't belong to Wall Street, nor does it belong to the government. They're trying to make it so, but as of now, it's still your money. China is desperately in need of American investments. Guess what? It's our money. We can decide not to send it to China and not to send it to woke corporations and not to send it to the government. We need to stand up and fight back. We have the same vote as an 18-year-old. I mean, I'm a lot older, but 18-year-old, one 18-year-old and my vote, they can cancel each other out. I vote one way, they vote the other way, it cancels out. But they don't have the same financial situation. Most 18-year-olds don't really have any money. So we need to stand up and weaponize our money, and we need to make it count to help preserve, protect, and defend the United States. Now, there's a poll. Wall Street Journal, NBC News took a poll, and here's what it said. It says, among people 55 and older, for example, 80% said patriotism is very important. That's our generation. Compared with 42% of those ages 18 to 38, the millennial generation and older members of Gen Z. 2/3 of the older group cited religion as very important, compared with 1/3 of the younger group. How do we pass our culture, our patriotism, our belief in God to the next generation? Well, our vote is going to be offset 1 for 1. Their vote's the same as ours. But we can weaponize our money and make a real difference. So that's the first thing, is that we need to recognize that we have the money. The second thing that we need to do is we need to repent. We've taken God for granted for too long, just kind of something you'd mention casually. Oh yeah, I say a prayer at night and so forth. Well, I believe in a very real God, and I believe God oversees the affairs of men. And I think that we should listen to the words of Jeremiah chapter 18, which said, "Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter?" There's a potter forming clay, and God said, "Hey, house of Israel, I can form you any way I want to, just as this potter can form the clay." He said, "Look, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. The instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up, to pull down, and to destroy it." And I think that may be where we are now, because we've turned from God so harshly. God said in verse 8, "If that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I thought to bring upon it." Whoa! He's not just talking Israel. He's talking about a nation. And if God's hand is turned against America, why don't we repent and ask God to return with His hand of blessing? So we need to do that. We need to cry out to God, get back in His Word, believe the truth, love our neighbor, do all the things. Christianity is not a hate religion, it's a love religion. We need to start following the 10 Commandments and the principles He laid out. And there's an 11th commandment. I mean, we have the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, love one another." We can't let love be stripped from us. Love is a part of our DNA, it's a part of our nature, it's a part of who we are supposed to be. So that's the second thing. The third thing, we need to promote moral, democratic capitalism. Yeah, people say capitalism, that's a bad word, I don't want to hear capitalism. It's a good word, but it needs to be moral and democratic. I mean, you've heard of the idea of crony capitalism? That's evil. That's where I'm going to try and take from you for my own benefit, where I'm going to manipulate the system to benefit me, where I'm going to buy off government. That's bad. No. What we need is moral. Adam Smith, the founder, the author of The Wealth of Nations, that really launched this incredible capitalist blessing that we've had in the earth, was first a moral philosopher who wrote the book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So it's got to be moral. Second, that means, when I say moral, by the way, I mean capitalism is based on the golden rule. It is based on do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, true capitalist system is, if I'm buying something, I value what's being sold to me more than the money I hold, and so I benefit because I get something worth more than the money to me, and the other party, the seller, is exchanging something that they've produced or created in exchange for money, and they value the money more than what they've created. And we both win. Both parties get wealthier as a result of free market capitalism. So it needs to be moral. It needs to be democratic. That means we've got to have equal opportunity. And I do not mean equity. Equity is equal outcome for everybody. The only way to get that is to dumb everybody down. So take all the money in the world and divide it up among everybody. Guess what? It won't last very long, because when you do that, people won't be incentivized to work harder or accomplish or create or build. Why should I do that? Why should I go to that trouble if there's no reward in it? That's one of the universal truths of life. So we need equal opportunity. But what we have to do for that is we have to make sure that regardless of your ethnic background, you have the opportunity to start a business. You're not restricted. And we should be reaching out. For example, people coming into the United States legally, we should reach out to the immigrants. They're coming here for the American dream. They're not coming for a social welfare system. They're leaving a failed system and coming to America. So we should reach out to them, and we should say, guess what? We want to teach you the values of liberty, personal liberty, individual liberty, what the Constitution allows, and get your creativity going so that you can build great opportunities here in the United States. We should make sure everybody has equal opportunity, democratic. And capitalism, it's got to be true free enterprise and economic liberty, not cronyism, moral democratic capitalism. That's how we fight back. And here's how you fight back personally. Weaponize your money. You've got money. It's a tool. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's not what you're trying to get. It's a tool to preserve, protect, and defend the culture, to enrich your life, to take care of your family. It's a tool. But you've got to weaponize this tool. You've got to weaponize your spending, your giving, and your investing. There are three things you can do with your money. You can spend it, you can give it, or you can invest it, save it. Have you weaponized it? Most people are pretty good at their giving. They don't give to things that they feel are bad for them. They don't give to causes that go against their values very often. It happens, but not very often. Spending is, are you buying products and services that are being used, taking the money and using it against you? Well, you should stop doing that. Maybe you need to boycott some things. Or if you like the product, for example, Coca-Cola, you like it, but you hate what they're doing in Georgia, you can either look for the Patriot Cola out there, or you can buy a share of stock in Coke and tell the management, knock it off. I'm your owner. I want you to do it the free enterprise, the pro-America way. You can invest your money in things that will turn things around. Like, for example, we've had Kevin and Sam Sorbo. They make movies that are wholesome movies, that are Hollywood movies that really promote our values. Have you seen The Chosen? The Chosen is a great show. It teaches about the life of Christ. Really entertaining, really well done. So we can invest in entertainment. We can invest in education. Don't send your kids to schools that are going to strip them of their values. Find those not woke places. I'm proud to say we're partnering with Liberty University to train investment advisors. Liberty University was ranked #2 in the least woke universities. Hillsdale College #1. We're great fans of Hillsdale, and Liberty University #2. And Liberty says, hey, we're going to try harder. We're going to get there. But focus on promoting our values, not destroying them. And finance. We've got to promote LSV, liberty, security, and values, not this ESG woke business. And how do you do that? Well, we provide the tools. The Economic War Room has the tools you need for this. Go back and watch our old shows. You can start at economicwarroom.com and have links to see all the old shows. They're really good. They're available multiple ways. Well, YouTube still allows some of our episodes on. They've stopped a couple and they've demonetized it, but you can still see some on YouTube. You see a lot of different places, but start at economicwarroom.com and download our free weekly economic battle plans. They really are a one-stop shop where you can get the real meat of what's in the show, and then it gives you the action steps. What do you do about it? And we don't have to be a voice crying in the wilderness. I'm telling you, on this show, we've covered topics before they happened. We talked about election integrity before we saw what happened in 2020. We've talked about the war on free speech and China, how they've taken over our pharmaceutical industry. We talked about grid vulnerabilities, including things like pipelines. We've talked about woke corporations and education and indoctrination. We've given you the heads up on so many of these things. We were early on COVID. We were early on explaining inflation was coming back. Those are all important things. Watch those shows. You'll learn a lot. And watch the new shows. And then finally, maybe the most important thing you can do from this entire economic war room is make sure that you have a financial advisor standing at your side that understands all of this and is willing to do the hard work with you to weaponize your money. That's why we created the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute. The Economic War Room trains advisors so that they understand all enemies, foreign and domestic, and they find a way to profit from it, if possible, for your investment portfolio. Now, what they do is, because the advisor knows you and it knows how to advise and how to invest money, when you add to that what we're sharing about the economic war taking place, the foreign and domestic enemies, and then we put them with other like-minded advisors in the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute, they get tools to better serve you. They learn how to vote the proxies to protect your values. They learn of new investment ideas and opportunities. They partner and hear from people like Dr. Ben Carson and Major General Bob Dees and Frank Holmes and Everett Piper and some of the great people that we've had in the war room. If we can train 10,000 financial advisors, that will equal $1 trillion of investment capital. Think of the voting power of that. Think how we can change the world with $1 trillion. But we need your help. Here's a question. Do you want your financial advisor opposed to your politics, opposed to your values, opposed to your interests? Of course not. We did a poll. 74% of people said, I want an advisor that is in line with my values, interests, and politics. Now, I got to question the sanity of the other 26%, but 74% agreed. You know, that's actually a pretty high number for a poll. It's crazy how so many people are willing to disagree with something so obvious. But 74% agreed, and that's a pretty high number for a poll. Then we asked, generally speaking, would you rather invest financially in efforts that promote the ideals and concepts of socialism or encourage growth through free market capitalism? Only 22% said socialism. The rest, 56%, said absolutely free market capitalism, and 21% said unsure. Now, I got to question the 21%. I mean, what are you not sure about? You got to pick right here. This is the battle of our day, and you got to pick. But a majority are with us now. I blame the education institutions and the financial institutions, but we can be a part of a political great awakening. This is our Dunkirk moment. When all seemed lost at Dunkirk. Here's the movie that they put, Dunkirk. This is our Dunkirk moment when all seemed lost. 300,000 British Expeditionary Force soldiers were trapped on the beaches of this small French beach town. And Hitler was rolling in tanks and surrounding the town. And they thought they'd just take them off by air. They'd just bomb them into smithereens. And that would have been the end of World War II, potentially, right there. But the King of England called for a national day of prayer. They prayed. And Winston Churchill had Operation Dynamo. He basically said every citizen that's got a boat needs to get in that boat and go across the channel and pick up some soldiers and bring them back. 300,000 men were rescued. It was one of the greatest evacuations in the history of mankind. And whether they knew it or not, that may have been the day that World War II was won for the Allies, even before America entered the war, because it meant Britain had the staying power. They had the ability to continue and live and fight another day. We need you. We need the small ships. That's what you are, a small ship. We need you to get your financial advisor to understand that we're facing a war against foreign and domestic enemies, and the biggest and most important thing you can do is weaponize your money. You need to be one of those small ships that helps save America right now. In the Economic War Room, we've covered a lot of topics. We've talked about election fraud, China, RX, insurrection and violence, the risk of stock market crash, how to stop the ESG threat, halting socialism, COVID warnings, space warfare, fixing the healthcare system, socialism failures, debunking Howard Zinn and the education communists, winning the war on poverty, whether or not you should own gold, defunding the Chinese, protecting free speech and moral democratic capitalism. We talk about that all the time. And we give you the action steps, but you really need an ally, and that would be your financial advisor. And there aren't many of them out there, but we've trained and will train financial advisors with great men and women like Alan West and Rosemary Gibson and Frank Gaffney and Dr. Everett Piper and Fred Fleitz and General Stephen Quast and Glenn Beck and Phil Robertson and Louis Gohmert and Jackie Deason, Star Perker, Gil Amelio, Gordon Chang, Ben Carson. These are all wonderful people that have joined us in the Economic War Room and believe in what we're doing. We need your help now. We've got all the things in place. And here's the question. It's the question that President Ronald Reagan asked. He said, if it's not us, who's going to do it? And if we don't do it now, when will it get done? If not us, who? If not now, when? Freedom is only one generation away from extinction. That's what the Gipper said. It doesn't pass to our kids in the bloodstream. It's not in their DNA. You know where it is? It's in you. And you have to pass it to the next generation. And I prayed and thought long and hard about this and been in this fight a long time. And I can tell you the most important thing you can do is weaponize your money. Don't invest in things destroying your values. And the best way to do that is to find an NSIC-trained financial advisor to help you. We don't tell them how to invest or what to invest in. We give them the principles. And then they match that up with what you need in your investment portfolio. And their job is to help you weaponize your money, vote the proxies the right way, and achieve change in America. They can't do it alone. We need thousands of advisors representing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of clients. But if we work together, we can win this battle. So how do you do it? You nominate your advisor. Go to economicwarroom.com/advisor. If you're not working with an NSIC advisor, then you need to nominate your advisor. And if you don't have an advisor, you need to find one and tell them, go get this course, we'll work together. Believe me, there are advisors looking for clients just like you right now. Together, we can win this battle. Remember, all of this, what we see as a marketplace, the stock market, the economy and all that, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.